try to make sure everyone is under 5 minutes, and I think I might be 2, so hopefully. So I feel lucky to be here, and I also felt very lucky to have seen Charlie and Ginger this past summer. Charlie was one of those special people, as you just said, that never really changed. But I knew things were a bit different for him even before I arrived at the house. The spirit, however, was the same, and I knew he was in good hands with Ginger. I really never imagined my summer visit would be my last one with him. I was first Charlie's student, then his colleague, and also friend, one of many friends that he never lost track of through the years. Charlie would call or write completely out of the blue, usually with an idea, some more doable than others, and it would be a Love Charlie letter that would remind me to be in touch. And I came across quite an old letter, and I'm going to just make some quotes off of it because I thought it was so wonderful. But I have to describe it. At the top of the page, there was a drawing, a small slice of Charlie's life, a self-portrait with Charlie in backwoods headgear, snow coming down, 2 setters with floppy ears, sitting in the trees in the valley, and Charlie holding a homemade sign denoting the date. There were familiar arrows, I'm sure many of you know those, making sure I wouldn't miss what was most important, not to mention the arrow on the back of the envelope, helping me to know where I could insert a knife to open it. Arrow number 1, did you call Gus? Arrow number 2, I would like to go to Corning for show and lecture, call me. And arrow number 3, enclosed fine snapshot of my angel, which was rejected by the Finger Lakes jury. He was very disappointed in that. I hope it's somewhere around still. And as always, there were enclosures. Lord only knows what he was reading to find pictures of custom yachts, but in his unforgettable and expressive handwriting, he added, quote, rumor of amazing dollars paid to deans, I think he was thinking this was me, led me to inform you of a fantastic bargain. Fantastic idea for educational conferences with faculty. They'd love it. There were photos of yachts attached, and I think that Charlie thought I should buy the 114-foot motor yacht called the Golden Greek for the faculty at Alfred. The letter ended with a quote, given a choice between going to heaven and hearing a lecture on heaven, people would choose the lecture, and I really think we all know what Charlie would choose. And of course, there were always the pictures of the dogs. Charlie really loved his dogs and knew that I loved dogs too. I know how much he treasured his walks with the dogs in the valley behind his house. Being invited to go with him into the valley always felt like Charlie letting you into his secret life. I like to think of Charlie walking this beautiful valley or on the wide beaches of England. Who else do you know that would send boxes of large rocks across the ocean to become part of a photograph, or maybe just to be there for the simple pleasure of looking at them? I miss Charlie as a student, colleague, and friend. In his last note to me, he offered some very simple advice. Love and retire gently. It can be wonderful. I want you to know I'm trying, Charlie. You led a really gracious life and have been a great model for so many of us. We all really miss you.
Thank you, Kathy. Our next speaker, and longtime friend of Charlie's, is Mr. George Cochran. George was kind enough to send me his biography, but it would take me the rest of the program to read it to you. He's a master of accomplishment. George has enjoyed a very successful career in New York City, Chicago, and LA. He's been a resident of Charlotte, North Carolina for the last 10 years. George has been awarded marketing and advertising accolades from New York City, Dallas, Boston, and Greenwich, Connecticut. He has been nominated and awarded as a Clio Award finalist on 4 occasions. He and his companies were recognized by the International Film Festival for both print and for TV spots, short films in the national and regional environments for his creative efforts while being retained by his Fortune 500 companies. He's a graduate of RIT, Communications Department, where he studied with Ralph Hashley, Minor White, Doctors Leslie Strobel, Richard Sankin, C.B. Niblatt, and of course, who else? Charlie Arnold. Please welcome George Cochran.
Well, good afternoon. It's quite an honor to be here, to say the least, when you consider how many people that Charlie blessed and he was a part of, and how many people he embraced and helped. Quite an honor. Thank you. Going back to 2005 or 6, I really would need a lady to help me here because men don't remember dates too well. So I know it wasn't raining, but Charlie gave me a call. I gave him a call, and I told him, actually, I said, you know, what you really need is a film. You need a film about you because you don't market yourself at all. I mean, you really need something substantial to move the mountain for you because you are so important, a very, very important personality. And he just, there was silence. A la Charlie, silence. So I said, I hope I didn't make him angry. But he came back and he says, you know, I'm doing a book, and I need your help, you know, if you're going to do something. I said, how fast can you do this film? So immediately it went from, oh, I'll do something, to I need it, well, I hope he doesn't tell me next week. And he said, in Charlie time, 4 months. I said, 4 months? In my time, it's like 4 hours is really what it is. So I flew up, and it was certainly welcomed by Ginger and Jeff and all the family, and we did that film, and it was called Just Call Me Charlie. It was really just a wonderful thing to do, and I got to see and talk to and be with him for 3 days that we shot. And while that was happening, what was going on is that he would be using all these Charlie words, like there's one that always stays with me, nifty. You know, I can go off with all kinds of New York City words which aren't as pleasant. Nifty. It just is so Charlie and so wonderful. So he said to me, he said, I need a preface, an opening to my book. He said, do you think you could write something? I said, sure, absolutely, yes sir. And what I'd like to do is to read that to you, and it's actually in this book. So if you would, and stay with me here while I confront through this, I say thank you. Charlie, an excerpt from Just Call Me Charlie, his book dated August 2005. Charlie wrote, I received this from George Cochran, one of my students who graduated in 19... You don't have to know. How fantastic, how delightful, how marvelous, signed, Charles Arnold. I missed nifty. And this is it. Charles Arnold, Mr. Arnold, Professor Arnold, Charlie, teacher, mentor, my friend, a doodler, lifesaver, caring, soft-spoken, be happy, guidance, photography, happy snaps, making, not taking an image, xerography, Henrietta, the gorge, sparse leaves, it's cold, I'm warm. Our youth, a beginning so formative, RAT, Aperture, Downtown, Plymouth Avenue, the Mayflower, that was his car, caring, depth of field, depth of thinking, depth of character, depth of perception, honesty, creativity, the individual. Your thoughts, the thought through time, gobs of time, lots of time, a lifetime, listening, questioning, seeing, touching, testing, explaining, wondering, pondering, refining, directing, defining, posturing, offering, to think and action, creating a something from nothing, well, just a smile. Never insisting, demanding, condescending, badgering, suppressing, always pleasant, thoughtful, sensitive, reassuring, consistently and constantly there as a teacher, a mentor, a friend. So, I'm thinking, still thinking, of impact, of what and how this man so quietly, so softly instilled, so gently a manner of assembling with sensitivity words, the image, essence, before the image underneath the halide, woven into expression, its fiber, its life. As he wrote, the fire of passion ignited by intellect. Today, a concept, my thoughts existing from nothing, is that true? From nothing? How callous am I, self-serving, egotistical, myopic, forgetting to dismiss his mission in life as a teacher, my beginning of thinking, of making, not taking, the learning, his patience, his planting of seeds to nurture for you, me, our harvest, our bounty. So giving this effort did change my life. A doodler, a life saver, a teacher, a mentor. Charles Arnold, Mr. Arnold, Professor Arnold, Charlie, our friend. We love you. So, and I think I took up 6 minutes, but I'm going to say that we did love him, and thank you so much, and it's an honor to be here, and any assistance I could be to anyone for anything, thank you.
Thank you, George. Our next speaker is Carl Schrinza. Carl is artist-in-residence and Fannie Knapp Allen Professor Emeritus of Art History at the University of Rochester. At Boston University, he was Chairman and Director of Graduate Studies and Professor of Art History. He has also taught at Smith College, Cornell University. Carl received his BFA here at RIT and his PhD from Harvard University. Carl has lectured, taught workshops at over 100 institutions in 33 states. His photographs are in most major museum collections and have been seen in over 80 one-person and over 250 group exhibitions since 1956. Please welcome my friend, Carl Schrinza.
Just call me Carl, and just call me Charlie. After over 55 years of friendship, it's difficult to believe that Charlie is gone. I met him at Eastman House when he first arrived in Rochester. A short time later, got to know him even better when he was at RIT as part of a threesome faculty with Ralph Hattersley, Meyer White. They formed the new 4-year program, the BFA program in photography, in which I enrolled with the likes of Pete Turner, Jerry Gilsman, Ken Josephson, Bruce Davidson, and 11 other first-class groups. He was a recent RISD graduate who studied painting and illustration. I'm a little nervous. He was different in all ways. He was not interested in shooting, taking, or capturing. He was focused on the idea of producing something new and personal, of making, of creating. One of the first projects he presented to his and my first Charlie class was to create a still life in 3 dimensions Indeed, he himself reveals this commitment by the way he collected discards of all kinds for the rest of his life. Discards which brought him the visual excitement from which he made much of his art. That team of 3 outstanding faculty was amazing, each with a very different background, different mindsets, different emotional sets, different blood pressures. Charlie was the sweet, quiet, inner soul that without a mandate was the equalizer of that faculty. Like the beautiful light green sport coat he wore every day to class and everywhere else. It's a beautiful sport coat. Now I lost my place. He was a calm, soothing spirit. Though not terribly interested in technology in those days, he surprised us all a few years later, after I had left Rochester for graduate school in Boston, when he became addicted, and I mean addicted. Addicted to, and he mastered, as no one else before or since, the technical, mechanical, zerographic process. He committed himself for the rest of his life to making the most extraordinary, emotion-filled prints from that system. Prints that in so many ways were the opposite of his other, uniquely his, art forms, exquisite drawings, and calligraphy, whether individual or conjoined. Every year I waited to be uplifted by his annual hand-drawn, unique graphic, holographic message. I hope all of you have kept yours and have gone to them and his xerographs for inspiration, for smiles, for dark introspection, for support from a man who would not be bothered by the daily, weekly chores of most fathers and husbands. What he was committed to was love, humor, calm, a total submission to settling into a project, whether making, teaching, or committing to the love of his family, or to supporting the individual creativity of his students, all of whom loved him as I still do. He could have created both kinds of graphic novels, the cartoonish and the mysterious. Though Charlie must have experienced disappointments, moments of disruption, he made no money to speak of. I never saw it. He was my model for accepting what was. Unfortunately, however, I could never reach his oneness with whatever came to pass. If there was any apparent hint of dark in his being, it was expressed in the abstractions of his xerographs. The depth of his inked sheets is beyond simple description. I will miss his unique innocence and humor. I will continue to reach for the simple, for his trust of what is, for his kind of eccentricity that supports others. And I will miss our interperson exchanges. I will, however, never let go of his presence in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl. Now we're in for a treat. Charlie's eldest son, Jeff, has produced a film about his dad. It is written, a lot of it's in Charlie's own words. It's titled A is for Amazing. Let's watch that film.
No sound, Steve.
Most of the people that I know intellectualize about how they think about things, and I don't. I guess I have a meager amount of intellect. I do practically everything intuitively. Sometimes I start working with things in terms of making a photograph in the studio, and I take one object, and that object somehow is very important to me. And it isn't something I intellectualize, it's something that I just feel comfortable with. I like the way it looks. And then I find something else that I like to put with it. Or I like to keep it very simple, or I make it very complex, depending on the way the wind is blowing, I guess. Teaching has been my great love. I did not teach wishing that I could do anything else. I do not regret 1 minute of it, 1 moment spent. This wonderful and unique opportunity to help the young. I have for my adult life been moved, strengthened, and educated by man's ability to make beautiful things. Things of superb, unquestionable quality. My role as teacher
has been to help open eyes and hearts to a lifelong quest for beauty. And I always learned much more from my students than I ever taught them. There is a great need to see beyond our fragile understanding and knowledge, to search for the unknown, the human, to delight in visual elegance, and joyfully to find answers or questions without words. And it's all about sharing the wonder of living. I often use the magic word, and the magic word is work. One does not leap out of bed in the morning, beat the chest, and set out to create great art. Cameras don't make photographs. People make photographs. No one is born with good taste. So exposure to great art is essential, along with a lifelong hunger for learning and exploration. The letter grade A does not mean excellent. A means amazing. The acquisition of skill is absolutely essential, and yet it is the least important thing. Acquiring skill may lead you to do the stylistic thing, the now thing, the proper thing. Don't try to fit into a popular mold created by someone else. You must discover your own unique shape in this world. I delight in each day's new light and each new experience. I delight in the astoundingly wonderful things that man is and that man has fashioned. I believe that man is wonderful. I believe that women are more wonderful. I believe that children are the most wonderful. I truly believe the individual is the strength of our culture. We can become educated, sensitive, moral human beings, but only with great effort. You will never become great photographers unless you become great men and women. So now my preaching days are over. We can move on to the less important things like photography and the hard, sweaty, sometimes miserable, often magical job of making images. We have two choices in our lives: to be miserable or to be happy. I have always chosen to be happy. I am like my hero, Wile E. Coyote, everlastingly innocent, everlastingly hopeful.
Jeff. That wasn't only amazing, that was nifty. That was nifty. What a great film, what a great job, and what great talent right there. Put this together. Thank you. I would like to introduce our next speaker, our friend Ron Talbot. Ron received his MFA degree from RIT in photography in 1982, and during his tenure in Rochester, he taught part-time at RIT and Monroe Community College, served as gallery director at RIT, and was employed as a special assistant to the director of the RIT School of Photographic Arts and Science. His work is included in numerous international collections and publications, including the International Museum of Photography, George Eastman House, The Art of Photography, Image and Illusion, Prentice Hall, Aperture, and many others. Ron currently serves as Senior Professor of Art and the Director of Photography at the John N. Hall Technology Rose Lerman Art Center's HAC, Central Pennsylvania's Community College. Please welcome Ron Talbot.
Thank you, Ron.
Charlie was so lucky. He lived two beautiful love stories, June Arnold and the beautiful Ginger.
Say it again.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
If you pardon me, I'll repeat myself in case you didn't hear that. I was saying that something to the effect that Charlie was so very lucky because he lived two beautiful, beautiful love stories in his life. The wonderful June that I love so much, and the wonderful Ginger that I love so much. I still show June's work to my students, her beautiful metaphoric images. She was a spectacular photographer too. I love Charlie so much, we all do. I just want to share one story with you in the brief time that we have. It's a story that Charlie told one of the first weeks that I had him in the MFA graduate program at RIT. As a lot of you know, the first 5 weeks of that program were Owen, who's also a great mentor and friend that I love. And then the second 5 weeks, Charlie comes on board. What a great team, one of the greatest teams I think ever in the history of photography and photo education. So Charlie was on board about a week or so, and he was showing some work in a darkened room. And I just happened to be sitting right next to the slide projector where Charlie was, but the projector was off, and I noticed that Charlie was leaving the room darkened. And Charlie told this story. Now, as everybody probably knows, or most people probably know, Charlie was known for taking his classes to the studios and venues of acclaimed photographers. I know he took art class, Steve is here, and Luis, to Karsha's studio, and he made many of these trips to Arnold Newman's studio and so on and so forth. But he was telling us about a trip that he took previously with some students to the studio of Hero, the acclaimed fashion photographer. So here we are in this darkened room. I'm sitting right next to Charlie with just a little ambient glow from the slide projector, so I can see him pretty well, even though for most people it's pretty much dark. And he's telling this story. He takes his students to Hero's studio, and Hero starts talking about the days when he was Richard Avedon's assistant. And of course, Richard Avedon, for the 3 or 4 people here that aren't photographers, is a great and acclaimed fashion photographer, historic. And so Hero was Avedon's assistant, and for somebody breaking into photography, I can't imagine anything that would be much more special than to be Richard Avedon's assistant. That's about as good an assisting job as one could ever get. And Hero knew that Avedon, Irving Penn, and also I think Charlie were very influenced by a great art director at Harper's Bazaar named Alexei Brodovich. Brodovich was at Harper's Bazaar for something like 25 years, was an icon in magazine layout in the fashion industry, and widely respected by a range of photographers. So Hero was telling this group, including Charlie, about when he did a workshop with Brodovich. It was a 10-week workshop, and it met one night a week, and the students were supposed to show up. There were 20 students, and Hero was one of them, and they were supposed to show up at Brodovich's studio, or probably it was Harper's Bazaar, I think, with a slide tray of their best work. So the first night comes, Charlie's telling this story in the darkened room. The first night comes, and Brodovich looks at everybody's work, does not say a word, not a word. Goes to the back room, comes out with a big box, dumps the box on the table, and the box is full of couture, high fashion, red shoes, all different. Brodovich gives everybody, including Hero, a red shoe, and says, shoot this, come back next week. So that's what they do, except the second week, only about 18 of the 20 people showed up. But those 18 did shoot the red shoe, including Hero. And so Hero looks at all these slide trays, 18 slide trays of the red shoe, and again, does not say even one word. But Hero felt, of course Hero's telling the story, Hero felt that he lingered just a bit more on Hero's work, even though he didn't say anything. So he was very motivated. He took this as a great motivating factor. And after all this, at the end of that evening, Brodovich says, do it again. Now keep in mind, he didn't say anything in the way of critique. He just looked at the work. He says, do it again with the same shoe. They ended up shooting the same shoe for 10 weeks. So Hero is really motivated because of Brodovich lingering on his work for a few more seconds possibly than other people. And he works really, really hard, and he comes back, and this time, in the third week, Brodovich starts talking about everybody's work. And he seems to be talking about Hero's work a little more than he's talking about anybody else's. So Hero, in the process of continuing week after week through the 10th week to shoot his red shoe, quits Avedon, which is really pretty amazing when you think about it, and just throws himself into this and does nothing but this day and night, shooting this red shoe. At the end of the 10th week, the last week, Brodovich asks Hero to stay after class, and after everybody has left, he says, Mr. Hero, I want to give you a job shooting an assignment for Harper's Bazaar. And of course, Hero went on to be one of the great, great fashion photographers for Harper's Bazaar. So he says, I want to give you a job. You're shooting your first assignment for Harper's Bazaar. He disappears in that back room again, and he comes out, and he gives him, for his first assignment, a blue shoe. Now, I'm sitting by the slide projector. I don't know if Steve and Luis Monforte from Brazil, I just saw him too, he was in the class. I don't know if they remember this, but I think maybe I was the only one that saw this because the room was darkened. But the tears were streaming down Charlie's face. And Charlie composed himself, and I don't think anybody really noticed it, but I noticed it. And to me, that just summarized Charlie in a nutshell. Passion. He was passionate and full of love. And we love him and celebrate him. And I thank God for him every time I teach. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. That was a great story. I got to thinking while you were telling the story, though, I think I heard that story, but I didn't see all the emotion, but I definitely heard that story. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Paul Lang. Paul's photographs have been featured in distinguished publications worldwide, including Vogue, the New York Times, amongst others. In his past life as a prominent New York City-based fashion photographer for 25 years, he traveled the globe on editorial assignments with subjects as diverse as Hillary Rodham Clinton, Cindy Crawford, Ralph Lauren, Halle Berry. 6 years ago, he relocated to New York's Hudson Valley and started a new life as a fine art photographer. Immediately engaging with his local surroundings on a number of large-scale photography projects about place. One project, titled 50 Acres, is a 6-year exploration of one property close to home, out of which 4 series have grown: Foul Portraits, Paradise, Disturbed Paradise, and Big Blooms. Please welcome Charlie's friend and mine, Paul Lang.
Good afternoon. Charlie meant a lot to me. He was like my dad. He had an incredible way of giving support and guidance. And he was a gentle teacher. And it was a matter of putting things in front of you, and that's how he taught me. I met him when I first arrived. I was at RIT in 1971 to 74. My freshman year was a typical freshman year, and when I was signing up for my second year classes, somebody said, "Oh, you got to check out Charlie's classes." So fortunately, I had a conversation with him, and in the following September, I showed up. Charlie was absolutely instrumental in my life. It wasn't about technology, it wasn't about how you made a picture, it was what you thought about it. And he taught me about the idea and how important it was to grasp that idea and work it and work it and work it again. And he had this incredible way of guiding me, and he would just throw things at me subtly, whether it was school or even later on in life, because the thing I treasure most is I was a friend of Charlie's for 39 years. And after, in the last 5 years, were sort of like a reawakening. And I got to meet Ginger, of course, and Charlie, on their trips back and forth to Rhode Island, would stay with us. We live outside of Albany. And it was sort of reestablishing this teacher-mentor thing. And in one of our conversations, he, in talking about work, he said, "Why do you bother?" And bother was one of his, like nifty, bother was a big word in Charlie's vocabulary. And it wasn't about the technical details, like I said, but it's about the bigger picture. And he says, he would tell me, it's because it's something you saw, something you loved, and you started working on making that picture, and you were doing this when I was a student, he said to me, and I've been doing it all my entire life. He says, and you've never really stopped. It's just that now you're bothering more than ever before. And he would come to my studio in New York, like Ron had mentioned. Those trips were really integral to me as a student. I had always wanted to work in New York. I didn't know how to make that happen. And that first field trip was visiting quite a number of studios in the city. And the great thing about it was he tailored, when we came back to Rochester, he convinced Dave Engdahl and Lothar Engelman to throw this standard program out the window. This kid was going to New York, and we're going to do whatever we have to make it work for him. And so for 2 years, I basically did independent study with Charlie. It was the greatest gift. As an adult, as a parent, the great thing in the last 5 years, my younger son, Christopher, is also a photographer. And we used to come up to Rochester, and then we were checking out schools. We checked out RIT, and Christopher's a student at Alfred. But the great thing was, Charlie would critique Christopher's photographs. He would show him books in the basement of the house. Christopher would live down on the mattress down on the floor for the weekend we were here, or whatever. Or Charlie was at our house. But it was the interaction, it was the subtle guidance of what was important about making images. And for this, it was a grand thing. And for Jennifer and me, it was an incredible relationship. So, thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. Our next speaker is Patty Ambrogi. Patty is an associate professor here at RIT. She holds an MFA from the Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester. Her work has been exhibited nationally, including the Center of Book Arts in New York City and the Boston Cyber Arts Festival. Additionally, she has lectured about moving media and the still photographer in numerous conferences. She is founder of the Media Cafe at RIT, a curriculum that promotes the production of temporal work, crossing disciplines, and media. She is a recipient of various honors and awards for her work, including the Eisenhower Award for Outstanding Teaching. Please welcome Patty Ambrogi.
You asked me to address a simple question, how I met Charlie. In 1981, Richard Zakia hired me as a one-year sabbatical replacement for B. Nettles. And Kathy, I think, was gone that year as well. You went around. There were 2 women in the whole school back then. Yes, nodding her head, yes. Charlie at some point took me up to the 4th floor studios and decided that he wanted me to be a part of the team at RIT because he thought I could come and stir things up. I think it would take Kathy Collins to realize that eventually, but eventually I came on board. I want to say a few personal things about Charlie, like everybody has. It's been a lot of really important to look back over these past weeks and think about his presence in my life and our lives. Charlie did a lot of wonderful things, not only for his students, but for his junior faculty as well. Charlie took me to meet Bob Gunlock early on at the Skunk Works, who would become a lifelong friend. The inventor who held 176 patents at Xerox. Charlie and I were invited to the biennial in Brazil to show our work with Luis Monforte. And every night Charlie took me through these back roads to a telephone so that I could call my children and hear their voices. They were 2 years old. He accompanied me on that. Another story that comes to mind is an interview project that we did at my house, and we are searching for those tapes. They were 6 evenings of wonderful exchanges. I believe they're in the U of R archive, and we're going to find them. A special story about that is that my kids were 2 years old and Charlie came over, and one night the story hadn't been told yet, and I excused myself to go up and hear the story. And pretty soon I look around and Charlie's there listening to the story, and he came the rest of the evenings early so he could hear the story before the story. What I'm going to read is something I wrote as a young woman 22 years ago from these interviews that I did with Charlie. And it's a little excerpt, it's a couple minutes, and I think it adds another parallel piece to the story that you've been hearing all afternoon. When I began to and I'll leave it in the tense it was written. When I began to interview Charles Amasa Arnold Jr., I asked him what were his earliest influences. Charlie spoke about his mother and his Swedish grandmother, who made him aware of how beautiful a cloud was, or how unusual a piece of plant life was at his feet. It seems logical that these forms from nature would someday be transcribed through Charlie's love for surface to become the subject matter of his xerographic drawings. Charlie called himself a thing person. He collects things that nature throws away. His studio shelves are lined with hot glue sculptures of weeds. His long desk at school was piled to the ceiling with his collections of things that other people failed to notice. This junk is the expressive language in which Charlie reveals his ideas. He collects seed pods and squashed aerosol cans, creating theatrical landscapes, shaping them by adding and subtracting ingredients and light. Charlie starts by putting stuff down, something that gives him feedback, something that produces an image for which he can feel excitement. This is the prologue of a process, a tender evolution. Scraps from nature take on the effect of headdress. Pieces of wood become the stage to hold it. Charlie moves through these free-falling associations, responding to opportunities as drips of paint fall on mistaken places and arouse his interest. It is through these chance encounters and subjective reactions that he shapes the piece, moving steadily from an accident to that point he recognizes as the conclusion. He then records the experience on a haloid Xerox machine or a common office copier. Charlie actively resists intellectualization concerning the motives for or the consequences of his actions, preferring to put his work in perspective like the wordless movements of a chess player. He chooses to know his subject not through theory or through the interpretation of its symbols, but rather like McLeish describes the poet's necessity to know the world, directly as the man knows the apple in his mouth. Charlie taught in the School of Photographic Arts and Sciences for 31 years, and he retired in the summer of 1987. Charlie never lost his excitement for learning and understanding. It was the thing he taught all of us who surrounded him, students and faculty alike. Charlie's passing and his presence has been this wonderful opportunity to remember his words like delightful, finding him in the back of my classroom, taking notes, and to remember that in this complex moment that we live, that things can be beautiful, simple, and delightful. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Patty. Our last speaker, before we have an open mic, is Richard Peake. Richard is the director of the Rare Books and Special Collections Library at the University of Rochester, where he serves as curator of several special collections, including the Charlie Arnold Archive. Thanks to Richard, a marvelous exhibit of Charlie's work went on display in September of 2006, and it was titled Charlie Arnold, the love of the visual and included 60 beautifully installed prints and a film done by George Cochran. For Charlie, the highlight of the show was a big surprise that he got to see the night before the show opened. The highlight was 25 prints submitted by former students with a comment. He said, "You have moved me to some of the loveliest happy tears of my amazingly happy life. Please welcome Charlie's friend, Richard Peake."
I think this is going to be a bit dry because I'm actually going to talk about the stuff and not so much about the man, because the archive is made up about the stuff, though Charlie would disagree about that, and we'll get to that in just a minute. The Charles A. Arnold Jr. Archive was established in 2006 in the University of Rochester's Department of Rare Books and Special Collections as a means to create and preserve a permanent research collection of Charlie's xerographic art. Xerographic art is now known popularly as copy art, and in the true democratic spirit of academic fairness, the name change came about because other artists started using other copiers than Xerox copiers. Well, fair enough. But what isn't fair is this. The critical literature frequently places the beginning of xerographic art in the mid to late 60s, often citing Sonia Sheridan in the United States and Bruno Minari in Italy as the pioneers of the art form. As recently as 2006, in John A. Walker's book, Copy This, A Historical Perspective on the Use of the Photocopier in Art, the artists and curators identified as being at the forefront of the art form include Helen Chadwick, Tim Head, David Hockney, Paul Berry, Ginny Lloyd, Jose Acala, and Klaus Urbans. But no Charlie Arnold. Puzzling. The Grove Encyclopedia of Art credits Bruno Minari as the true pioneer with work in 1963. More puzzling still, because we know Charlie was producing work in 1960 and did his first work in 1959. So I ask again, why no Charlie Arnold in the critical literature? Why indeed? And the answer to that question appears to be the very nature of Charlie himself and how he chose to live his life. And with all due respect to the above-mentioned artists, Charlie's work is certainly the earliest of any significance, and to my eye, it was the most imaginatively realized and remains the most visually engaging. The other artists mentioned were copy artists. That is, they used the later direct imaging photocopiers, similar to the typical office copiers that we all know. Charlie used the Haloid Xerox standard system, first marketed in the mid-1950s and developed specifically for reducing large engineering drawings. The 6-foot by 2-foot Model 4 with extendable bellows is a visually beautiful machine, something that could have possibly been conceived in an erotic Ansel Adams daydream. It's more camera than photocopier, and the imaging process was more photographic than xerographic, or at least as we understand the term to mean today. The standard system has an exposure time of 5 to 3 seconds and a finished image production time compared to the direct imaging office copiers of about 7 minutes. There was nothing instant about the standard system, and there certainly wasn't anything instant about Charlie's art. It was Xerox engineer Bob Gunlock who in 1959 first brought the standard system to Charlie's attention, and the good work began in earnest. At that time, Charlie was teaching in RIT School of Photographic Arts and Sciences for 2 years, and Charlie moved to Rochester at the invitation of Beaumont Newhall and Minor White to join the staff of the George Eastman House. He brought with him a young family of 3, a strong visual aesthetic, a broad Yankee accent, a New Englander's streak of independence, and probably unknown to his family at the time, a deep yearning to one day sport jaunty chin whiskers, which he eventually did. And as a gifted photographer and avid tinkerer, one can easily understand Charlie's fascination with the temperamental standard system and the lush tones and graininess of the prints produced, as well as his fascination with an infant imaging system in need of nurturing. Nearly a decade before direct imaging copy art copiers became widely available, Charlie was using the standard system to produce the first xerographic art. A fascination with the natural world can easily be seen in his work. Found objects often intermingle with things of nature. A talismanic sculpture of twigs and feathers wards off encroaching dangers. A gathering of roots reaches upwards from a bed of river stones. An egg anchors seed pods. A skeletal branch scrawls a secret calligraphy. Lightning is caught in a bell jar. A spirit sways within a lens. Spectras of diffusion sparkle and dance. As an unabashed optimist, Charlie found joy in offering the visual world evidence of harmonious possibilities. And if I may be so informal, this is beautiful stuff. This is art. Embracing play and joy was always part of his creative process and something he made part of his teaching philosophy, first at the Rhode Island School of Design, then at the London Polytechnic School of Photography, and later at RIT, and a sense of play can easily be discerned in his prints. I have the photographer Paul Hoffler to thank for introducing me to Charlie. Paul and I were working on building the Paul Hoffler Archive, which is now at the U of R, and as we worked, he would frequently talk about Charlie, and he would show his cherished xerographic print from Charlie. And it was because of Paul's urging, you'll love it. You have to go and see Charlie's art. You'll just love it. And you'll love Ginger. She's a hoot. And intrigued and spurred on by Paul's enthusiasm, and because at that time I was feeling somewhat deficient in hootiness, I made plans to visit the Arnolds to see what all this hootiness was about, and indeed I did see what it was about. So Charlie and I started planning for the archive and also for the exhibit. To date, the archive includes 40 xerographic prints, photographs of students and friends, and a few examples of his professional writing explaining his aesthetic. I am very much a people person, but I am also a visual thing person, he wrote. My images are made, not taken, constructed, not found. I am very happy that no darkroom is required. The xerographic process allows me the luxury of refining and altering things until I am pleased. In our conversation, there was an impish quality about Charlie that I frankly found to be a bit annoying, because he would always shy away from discussions about his art and himself and much preferred to talk about his family, about June, about Ginger, and of course about his students. When preparing the cases for the exhibit, I wanted to include as much work as I could, sometimes overstuffing a case, and Carly would pull back. Let's be careful about overstatement here. Less is more. Apparently, less is more didn't hold true for the deep affection he had for his family, students, and friends. for whom more was always more. I don't think Charlie would give two snaps about being considered the first xerographic artist, but I do. I hope that this permanent research archive and future exhibits and the lovely website prepared by the family, and now this lovely film that we just saw in George's film, will help to promote Charlie's work and correct the oversight in the critical literature. Charlie deserves to receive more credit for his work. For the U of R exhibit, which opened in September of 2006, Charlie chose the simple title, The Love of the Visual, an unpretentious choice for a no-frills, unassuming man in love with life and people, and who in turn is loved by so many. As has been said earlier this evening, teaching was Charlie's true passion, not art. Art was an avocation. That fact, along with a stubborn disinclination to promote his own art above others, and a stubborn refusal to intellectualize about his creative process, may explain why Charlie's work hasn't received the full recognition it deserves. Self-promotion just wasn't in his nature. His common sense attitude to life, teaching, and art would serve us all well. Don't take yourself too seriously. Be mindful and observant. Strive to be happy. Be joyful and caring. Love one another. Play. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Now we got, what we'd like to do is have a little open mic time. I know there may be some people in the audience that have come into this that met, loved, or had some sort of interaction with Charlie and would like to say something. So we've got a mic here, and we'll open it up to anyone that would like to make a comment. Is there anyone like to say something?
Like students, have any questions? No questions, please. I'll come see you. You look like a pretty good guy. I'll take it. Thank you.
It is on. I'm John Miller, and I lived next door to Charlie and Ginger for 10 years. I got to know this wonderful man. And, really looked up to him for the times that we had together. I had the fortunate experience of having him come to my home to view some digital photography that I had done, and I showed him the way that images can be manipulated with Photoshop. And he was amazed, but he didn't say anything. You know, it was his way. But that was one of the things, and I'm also a proud owner of one of his graphic prints, which was featured in Jeff's film, as well as his hat.
It's just the Irish guy in me, but that's nifty. All right, please, next. Okay, I'm on my way.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Greg Arnett. I'm Director of Operations at the college and the school in it. I've known you, Charlie, for well over 30 years. I started in '81. I think Patty and Rosie was telling her story. One of the first things that I was entrusted with in my first summer was Charlie taught me how to maintain and take care of the xerography equipment. And it was a little intimidating because he was sort of one of the big guys.
basically taught me how to take care of the selenium plates and the scoretron and all the various stuff that went into making that process work. And he kind of latched on to me, and over the years we did a lot of projects together, one of which was he was involved in the Rochester Community Science Center, and we did a show together featuring a bunch of work on canoes. And Charlie wanted to photograph a bunch of canoes, and we dragged them up to the studio. And he sort of went into art director mode and got behind the camera. And he asked me to handle the lighting. And for those who think way back in the old days, we had a lighting unit made by Ascor. It was 5,000 watt seconds. And Charlie wanted me to hand hold this thing and get in so he could reveal some detail of the canoe. So we're shooting, and I'm kind of nervous because this thing was kind of scary to have in your hands. And he wanted me to feather the light, so we took this Polaroid sleeve, and I'm feathering the light, and Charlie pops it, and the thing goes up in flames. And he didn't even bat an eyelash, he just said, put it out, keep going. And that was, just thinking back about technology, because that's kind of what I do for a living. And Charlie really didn't care about that stuff. He really did just want to get the image and not get sucked into all that high-tech stuff. So it's kind of a good reminder, for me anyways, to simplify things. Thanks.
Please, who's next? You, sir? You want to talk? Say anything? No? Okay. One of my students. Anyone, please.
Right here.
Oh, my goodness, you're far away. You do? Oh, please do. This gentleman's right here.
I'm actually in design. Class of 76, and I was part of Charlie's students. One of the words, one of the comments I want to say on the film, Charlie always used the word amazing. If you want an A in my class, you better amaze me. And that's what we all strive for. Since then, I've recently lost my vision. And one of the things that kept me going is just the thought of Charlie and his thought and his dedication to the aesthetic. And even though you can lose your eyesight, but you will never lose your vision due to Charlie Arnold. And that inspiration, I think everyone, keep on that gift of eyesight to be able to see each and every day. But Charlie taught you to see if you had physical eyesight or not. And that's one of the things that I take away with me each and every day that I get up. One of the, I was thinking of words were at a loss for me. And Charlie's like a great sunrise. It's just an amazing thing each day to think that there's Charlie Arnold and he's out there, and that inspiration that he gave you each and every day to create, from 30, 40 years each of any endeavor that you may do. I'm a proud owner of one of Charlie's xerographs, which I exchanged one of my prints when I was in printmaking, photo printmaking, and I exchanged it, and that's one of my treasures. It was one of the only portraits he took. I think it was of you, Kathy, that he took, and most of it was still life. It was the only portrait, and I was so privileged to exchange a print. And in the process of obtaining that print, it was a teaching moment. Charlie taught any endeavor. He always gave you more than what you got, and I think that sums up with Charlie's life. And I'm just thankful to have known Charlie. Thank you.
He was going to be quiet. That was wonderful. We're going to cut for station break, but I'll be right back. I'm coming around to you. This is cut for station break for a commercial. Just need time to get there. All right.
I knew Charlie in a very different way, and that's why I offer this perspective. and it's a very simple one. My perspective was from the platform of our church where I was a reader when Ginger and Charlie first came to our church in East Rochester. And just two things that I loved. One was the joy that Ginger and Charlie always brought into that church, sitting so lovingly together and smiling and just bringing so much joy. And the other thing was that they always matched. Whatever Ginger was wearing, Charlie was wearing a shirt and tie to match. And he did that so joyously, so I just wanted to bring that one little note that captures a little bit of the image of Charlie. And he was so proud of his children as well, he was always talking about them.
Please.
All right, George, come back over.
My cardiologist. I just had bypass surgery, so let's not be expected.
I'm Edie Friedman. I was a student of Charlie's back in the early 80s, and we became friends. I'd totally forgotten. We did some outside projects together at a nature center years ago, and Charlie was designing exhibitions for them, and somehow I got involved in doing the signage and stuff. But a few years ago, when Charlie and Ginger were in Rhode Island, Charlie came up by train to Boston, where I live, and spent the night. We went to an Edward Weston show and went to a Joseph Cornell show, and we just had the greatest time. And Charlie stayed at my house, and I was just talking to him about how lucky I was, that I had this incredibly lucky life. And he stopped me, and he said, not lucky, fortunate. And it was just, I've thought about it ever since, because it is such a difference in terms of the depth and the richness that he meant. And he's absolutely right. I'm incredibly fortunate. So I just wanted to share that. Oh, no. I wouldn't do that to you.
I was very fortunate, thank you, Edie, that's a great word, to study with Owen and Charlie. And a very quick story that I still think of. I don't you probably in the class, but Charlie came into class late one day, and we were sitting around, and of course we waited, and he said, I'm really, really sorry, but I was crossing the Irondequoit Bay Bridge, and this panel truck had skid. It was kind of, I think it was rainy that day. It had skid, and he said the driver wasn't hurt, which is very much like him. And he said that the back door sprang open, and the entire roadway was covered with ping pong balls. The truck was delivering ping pong balls, and he said there was just everywhere. It was incredible. He was describing, and we all sat there like, wow. And so I just assumed later this is going to be on the news. There was no mention of it. And it dawned on me the next day that he made this up. And, so that's the story, but I cross the Irondequoit Bay Bridge every now and then, and I think I still think it would look so wonderful.
Do I?
Yes, you have to. Yeah.
I'm the crazy Brazilian, according to Charlie. Em nome de todos os brasileiros que tiveram a oportunidade de aprender alguma coisa com Charlie Arnold, eu digo muito obrigado. On behalf of all the Brazilians who had the opportunity to share something and learn something from Charlie, I say thank you.
Come on now, all these wonderful people. Oh, you're kidding. There's somebody over there. Just quiet.
Is this Owen?
That's all.
Third time, and I taught with Charlie for many years. And I sat here and I made a list of our most important points. The proper way to do it, the aesthetic problem of having ears. How high could you pile paper over this? A better metaphor for yes. And we had a 15-minute walking conversation discussing Susan Sontag's
I just wanted to add that I remember one of the projects that was given to us as students by Heiner and Charlie. They were wonderful, wonderful people, to say the least. And you're a student, and you're just in awe of where you are. And this man stands up and he looks at you and he says, "I want you to photograph isness." Okay. Well, who is this business? So that was one of the projects we got from Charlie, and just let you know how strange it could be. But anyone else that would like to speak, please. I was going to come to you because out of respect, and you have to talk. You have to speak. Let's have a round of applause.
I can't even speak now, George. I have to say something. You know that. It's impossible for me to be quiet. I know the family said they weren't going to participate or say anything. Charlie and I, as you know, we're not on the internet, Facebook, all over Twitter, whatever. But I'll tell you right now, I have a special heart line, H-E-A-R-T. And he nudged me. And he said, "It's okay, Ginger. You can get up now. And you can say, we appreciate all of you people so much. My heart is just full with joy. You have no idea." One time we talked about, very seriously, when something would happen to us. And he was, as you know, very humble. And he didn't care about anything, you know. Put me whatever, you know. And I said, "You are so loved. I'll have my way. There's going to be a celebration for you." And he said, "Okay, whatever the family wants, I'll go along with, you know." And he said, "I will look down at you, and I may be walking the beach with the dogs or down in the valley." And some of the last things he always said to people in recent years as they would come to the house was, "Drive gently, baby steps, and keep smiling." And my heart is so full. My daughter said, "I'm going to count how many times you cry, Mom." And Susan said, and Chip said yesterday, "No tears, no tears." And I said, "But they're tears of joy." And he said, "No tears of joy, nothing, no tears." Everybody's so wonderful. Edie, who Charlie went and stayed overnight at her charming place just a few years ago. 4 years ago, was it, Edie? You could trust Charlie. I was not. Charlie, he always said he preferred women. And he had wonderful men friends, as you can see. And Richard Peake said, "I'm not going to speak. It's there's only a couple of women on this, he'd want more women, I'm not gonna be on this. But you could trust Charlie, and he had a ball going there. And as far as elaborating on things, paintballs or whatever, when he was at Eastman House, he told stories to people that he would walk through Eastman House and told things about George Eastman that weren't true. He would say how there was a tunnel to, whatever, and the women he had, and he said, and people would go away with this new vision of George. He said, that's awful. He said it made it more interesting. It was very boring. And the only thing I lied to Charlie was what time it was, to go to the dentist or whatever. I got to the point I didn't know which time he was supposed to go because I had lied about it. And he knew I had lied. I told him that. Anyway, I'd go on and on. I don't mean to. You all know who he was. Obviously, you were all fantastic. Dear Jim, it's almost over. Not over. It's another beginning. You've done a fabulous job. Jeff, Chip, I wasn't supposed to cry, but damn it, had to have a lot of tears. Everybody, wonderful, thank you, it's a celebration of life.
Thank you, George. I'd like to welcome our last speaker of the day, Professor Willie Osterman. Willie earned a BFA and MFA in photography and is now a professor here at RIT. He was a working printing assistant to the production of the Ansel Adams Special Edition prints, working with Mr. Adams in Carmel, California, and has worked as a contract photographer for Eastman Kodak. During his sabbatical for the year 2010, he received a Fulbright to develop a master's degree program in photography, the first in the country, and teach at the Academy of the Dramatic Arts at the University of Zagreb, Croatia. He has had over 80 exhibitions in the US, Italy, Turkey, Austria, China, and Croatia. His work is included, among others, in the collections of the International Museum of Photography at George Eastman House, Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, and the University of New Mexico Museum of Art. Willie will talk about the Charles Arnold Lecture Series. Willie?
Thank you. One quick story, though, before I talk about the Arnold series. I may be the only person that Charlie scared the hell out of. And I say that because when I came here to start teaching, the very first faculty meeting we had, day one, I moved here from Oregon, and I was sitting in the front of the room, and Charlie was sitting beside me, and during faculty meetings, which is one thing he said he will not miss about being here, he always drew on styrofoam cups. I don't know if any of my colleagues, and he was drawing, and he was looking at me, and he was drawing, and he was looking at me, and I go, who is this guy? And after the talk was over, he leaned over to me, he said, I was doing some figuring, and he said, do you realize that in 6 years you will be senior faculty? I was 26 years old. That scared the hell out of me. And I leaned over and I said, that's okay. I'm only going to be here for at the most 3 years. That was 1984. And here we are. Anyway, after Charlie retired, and Kathy, I think you had a lot to do with this, and Owen, the establishment of the Charles Arnold Lecture Series, which is in its 24th year, we're happy to say. On each poster, we have a little tribute to him, and it says, since 1988, the series has invited speakers with experience, talent, insight, and discovery to the creative and intellectual culture of RIT in Rochester. It is presented in honor of Professor Charles Arnold's contribution to the school and to the world of education and photography. Next year we celebrate the 25th anniversary of that. As near as Dennis and I could figure, from putting the list together, I believe there's been about 100 speakers that have come in, and somewhere around a quarter of them have been our alumni, as well as young alumni who have come in just a few years out of their graduation to talk about how successful they have been, and even through a lot of these lectures, we have had a lot of students that have made contacts and have gone on to work for some of these photographers. We've had, obviously, photographers from all disciplines, including journalism, advertising, and fine art, and many who have blurred the lines between them, which is becoming more and more of a standard. Beyond photographers, we've had filmmakers, writers, sculptors, multimedia artists, poets, realists, surrealists, documentarians, and much more. So it's really about living and learning. Having been on the committee for a number of years, as often as I can squeeze my way onto them, we get the faculty together and have an exciting discussion about the different kinds of photography and different photographers we want to bring in, and we kind of cover the whole range of journalism, advertising, and fine art. Beyond the public presentations that are made, each presenter is asked to stay an extra day and spend a half day with the students. And we meet in a little conference room and look at work or just have a discussion, and it's so beyond a large lecture, there's also more intimacy involved in the whole process. We are right now, currently this moment, in the middle of our biggest Charlie Arnold lecture series ever. There are 10 Magnum photographers in town documenting Rochester right now. And on Wednesday there was a lecture where all 10 presented. As I understand, the largest lecture of Magnum photographers ever under one roof. And they are here. We took the majority of our budget to help support that, and we have more lectures coming up next week. And probably, I think what Charlie would enjoy the most about it is that we have 50 students involved with these photographers, helping them. And I see them, I was out with some of the photographers and the students this morning. The students' feet are not hitting the ground, they're floating. They're so excited at this opportunity. And 2 of them are talking about jobs, actually, for some of the world's best photographers. So that's really given us an influx of energy into the program. And again, that wouldn't have happened for our students unless it was for the Charlie Arnold Lecture Series. So that's a fabulous thing there. So now I'll do a plug for the Charlie Arnold Lecture Series. And I have some posters down here if anyone's interested, part of the Magnum series. On Monday, Magnum photographer Alessandra Sanguinetti will be presenting her work at 8 p.m. in Webb Auditorium. Rebecca Norris Webb and Alex Webb, husband and wife, will be doing a presentation called Together and Apart on Thursday at 8 p.m. in Webb Auditorium. And on May 1st at 5 p.m. here, Jennifer Carity will also make a presentation. Again, all part of the Charles Arnold Lecture Series. So in that regard, obviously his name lives on, but the spirit and enlightenment that is brought to the culture of RIT in Rochester continues. So thank you.
Thanks, Willie. My last assignment. On one of my last visits with Charlie to show him some new work that he had requested to see, I was really hoping to get some feedback because I had done some very different things from what he had seen in the past. He looked at the prints, and then he asked me what I thought. I told him, and he smiled. He said, "See, you know the answer. All you have to do is just trust in yourself. Listen to that little inner voice. It'll tell you when it's right. It reminded me of Carlos Castaneda's book, The Power of Silence, when he said, when you trust in yourself, you learn to trust in the very wisdom that created you. Charlie, I'm still working on that last assignment, but I do understand. I would like to end this celebration with something that Minor White said. How small we are, a lifetime of seemingly unimportant moments, then one look. One hand joins two, then three, then more, until a group is formed. A flow of energy is passed around the circle, a feeling of flow. An hour extends and it reaches into a week. Weeks into years. We all really do touch each other now, not like two sticks cut off by boundaries, but more like soft churning energy merging in and out with formless form, constantly changing in motion, until the space is filled with light remains. There is no you, nor I, nor we. It merges into all. In that still center, all is equivalent to one, unseparated. We don't have to have ever met, and yet we are all connected. And what each of us do in our life ultimately affects us all. Charlie, you definitely affected us all, and it will never be forgotten. So until our paths cross again in the future, as they will, enjoy the adventure, and please never grow up. And we'll do our best to ensure the magical energy that you sprinkle throughout the arts community continues. Thank you all for coming. Please join us now for a reception in the Spas Gallery. View a few pieces of Charlie's work. There will be some people out here kind of direct you over to the Spas Gallery. Not too long walk. And after the reception, the family and friends would like to invite everyone who would like to continue the conversation to meet over at the Loving Cup next to RIT, where many of us will be. Thanks so much for all of you for coming. This has truly been an honor for me. Thank you.